Well, I just took the air cleaner off this generator to start fooling with it, and as you can see, it still has the factory original air cleaner in it. It has the overspray on the rubber from when it was in the filter can. Actually pretty clean, and I doubt I'll replace it. Probably just reuse it. You can see, I don't know if this shows up in there or not, but you can see it's like a tarry goop that's in that carburetor that's preventing the choke and the throttle from moving. I mean, I can, if I really work it, I can move it, and it just feels real gooey, so I think I'll just pop the carburetor off and disassemble it and throw it in my parts washer over here. And also, this fountain I made from estate sale stuff, my dad gave me a bunch of agates to put in it. So that'll be pretty neat out on the patio running. Anyway, back to the generator. I'll pull a plug and we're going to check for sparking. Well, the tripod I have here is kind of rickety, so I'll do best with it. But it had basically a dime store spark plug in this engine. So we'll see. It looks like a fairly new one. It looks like it was running rich, really black. And from the black on the housing of the generator there, from the exhaust, I suspect it was running rich. And actually from that goo in there, I'm suspecting they probably ran this thing on 2-cycle mix. So let's see if we got spark. Get that in the spark plug boot there. Oh yeah, we got good spark. Does that show up in the video? Okay, hopefully this is a little better view and you can see the spark that this engine has. It actually has really good spark. So I think we'll clean the air filter, or the carburetor I mean, and drain the oil out. I did check the oil, it is full. Turn it back kind of where it was there. It's full of oil. Right to the top where it should be. Now I'll drain that out and put fresh oil in it, and we'll go from there. And when I talk about dime store spark plugs, these no brand plugs, they just tend to fall out prematurely. It does look like a Champion, and it may be made by Champion, but that's another thing I buy at estate sales is spark plugs. Whenever I see them at estate sales, I mean, you can, I bought probably a box of 20 of these at an estate sale for 10 bucks. That's 50 cents a spark plug. And I have a huge milk crate full of nothing but spark plugs. So, you know, if I need a spark plug for something often, I can find it. If I can get them for 50 cents or less a plug, I just buy them. Good thing to have around. Alright, let's get the carburetor off and go from there. Hopefully I didn't lose any of the last video. I had a memory card that filled up, but to remove these fuel line clamps, these style clamps, get yourself the proper pliers to do it. They're just have little, there's a little lever you can flip. They just have little teeth in the jaws, and these things can turn to fit your clamp wherever you need to. And there's a little thing there you can flip up so they lock, so you can move the clamp around. So I just like these, you know, they just fit that clamp nicely, and then you can move them out of the way, take them off. That's right down to the beginning there. So they just make life a lot easier with these clamps. Okay, what you do to get these fuel lines off, I just take something and twist them first to break them free from the nipple, and then take a screwdriver or something and push them off. Once they're twisted free, they'll push right off. And that's as hard as a rock, so I'll just replace that, so I don't really care about that. And I'll save the clamp because I will reuse that. Kind of thin ones to get in here. And I'm turning the one on the manifold here. Alright, well, I'm not going to video all this unbolting bolts are pretty cut and dry. You just turn the bolts out. So I'll turn the video off and then I'll get them unbolted. Alright, the carburetor's unbolted and just hanging there, and just take note of where your governor linkage is. So you can just pull it off and pull the linkage out of the governor, because the throttle, it's stuck, so I don't think I can get it out of there unless I get the throttle freed up. But take note of which hole it's in. See how there's multiple holes in that throttle arm? Take note of which hole it's in so you get it in the right one. Also the same with your governor. That is nice and free. So it was in this hole right here. So just make sure you take note of where things were. I'll probably reuse this gasket, so I'm going to take it off and set it there so I don't damage it. And whatever I don't need to replace on this carburetor, I will leave alone. This actually has a float drain, so I'll probably have to replace that little O-ring, otherwise that'll drip. But yeah, we'll get it in the parts washer, wash it off, and then disassemble it. The carburetor, the choke freed up, but the throttle hasn't from putting it in the parts washer, but it's mainly just like really gummed up feel. But if you look at that choke butterfly in there, I don't know if it shows up, it's got a pretty good bend in it. So somebody's horsed with this trying to get that freed up and get it going. So I'm going to take that butterfly out and straighten it, and I'm going to count the turns the screws are open. That gives you a good starting point. I mean, somebody could have messed with them and they could be way off. Typically, if they are, start at 1.5 turns. But we're going to count them out and get the carburetor apart and soaking. Now you can see how bent the choke butterfly is. So we'll just give that a little straighten out there. And these generally, some of the throttle ones especially, go in one way. They have a bevel on the throttle ones. So always make sure you put them in the way you took them out. This is the side that faces the air cleaner on this. Well, I tried to turn these screws to count the turns, but they're not going anywhere. That one turns a little bit out, but not in. So what I'm going to do, this one doesn't turn either way, out or in. I'm going to take the bowl off, take as much of it apart as I can, which is basically the bowl. I'm going to throw it in a jar with lacquer thinner in it. Let it soak overnight. That'll clean all the crud out of it. Well, to my surprise, the inside of the bowl isn't that bad. I will replace that O-ring on that. That's just a matter of this is in a little... It's got a little groove in there. You can hold this in, push this down and pop it over. And I'm not going to do it on, well, I might be able to do it on the camera. Usually you have to get something to hold that little spring down. But there's a little slit there and that pops off, and you can take that out and put a new O-ring on that. The gasket for the bowl I'll probably replace. It's as hard as a rock, but it's got rubber paint on it, so it's, or red paint on the rubber, so it's the original one. And float doesn't look too bad. I'll take it off and shake it and see if it has water in it. I need a pair of needle noses, I guess. There we go. Float's good, no water or gas in the float. Usually you can hear the stuff in the float if there's moisture or something in it, but that's pretty clean. So there's a little bit of fluid from the parts washer in it, but that's pretty clean. It looks like the seat down in there is fine, but I will replace it, seeing I have new ones. And we'll soak this thing in some lacquer thinner so I can get that screw out and This is the main jet, and yeah, that's seriously plugged up, and I could turn the screw out. So I'll take this apart, and there's junk on there. So this thing definitely didn't run, even though the guy said it did. That definitely needs some major cleaning. There's little jets in that. There's one there, but there's a couple in there, and they're not even visible. They're so plugged up. So we'll get this carburetor soaking and everything freed up and working at it, and put it back on the engine. I think I'll just let it soak overnight. That's what I find the best way to clean a carburetor. Just throw it in, for these small engines, just throw it in a jar of lacquer thinner and let it soak. And yeah, it takes the paint off, but so what? It'll be all clean on the inside when I'm done. This is the little float drain thing, and as you can see, let me get a pointer here. There's a little crack right there in it. I don't know if that shows up in the camera or not, but that'll cause it to drip. So I'll replace that little rubber seal on there. Still plugging away on this carburetor. I did get the throttle arm free just from soaking it a few minutes in lacquer thinner. I just kind of wanted to work it and try and get the goo out of it, but somebody else had fooled with it. The throttle plate is bent too and was installed incorrectly. So I'll straighten that up and install it correctly. And I'm going to let this soak though for a while. I'm going to try and get that screw out. I really want to get it totally apart. And then I'll put it back in the lacquer thinner. And this screw turns now, so I can get it out. But I don't know if it turns in. Yeah, so I'll just have to set them at 1 or 1.5 and go from there. Adjust the carburetor because it just doesn't turn in properly, and if you jam them in there you can break the tip off in the carburetor, and I don't want to do that. So that's the screw, and there's a little O-ring and washer in there. The washer keeps the spring from tearing up the O-ring, so the O-ring always goes in there first and then the little brass washer after. Just thought I'd turned that light off. I think it was glaring in the camera, but I just thought I'd show this thing. You just take a rag and this thing wipes up pretty clean. So what I think I'll do is I'll just try and not get this generator part in the parts washer, and I'll try and clean the engine up a bit. The thing looks like it's going to clean up nice. It just wipes right off. And I want to take the blower housing off. Make sure there's no mouse nest in there. That's an important thing I think a lot of people overlook when they get into these old motors. Now I can see in there, and this is all clean in there. All right, I took the recoil housing off to kind of show you there's a clip right there that this fuel hose connects, and it goes through a hole in the sheet metal there, and I unbolted the fuel tank. It looks like the cylinder head gasket may have been leaking, so I'm going to pop the head off. And I probably have a cylinder head gasket. A couple of the head bolts were really loose, so that might have been why, but we'll just pop the head off. It'll take an extra few minutes. I'll change that fuel hose and clean up the recoil, which is actually in pretty good shape. Throw that in the parts washer and give it a good cleaning. And throw all this in the parts washer and all that. Alright, I pulled the head because I thought the head gasket was leaking, but I think all it was spilled gas, and I think somebody was running 2-stroke gas in that. But I wanted to show in the cylinder, I don't know if this shows up or not, but you can totally still see the cross-hatched machining in the bore. There's a couple little, that was grease there, but there's a couple very minor, very minor scores there. But overall, the bore is like really amazing in this engine, and like I say, you can still see the cross hatching from when it was manufactured. So I imagine this engine doesn't have a lot of hours. And the valves they have a little surface rust on the exhaust valve because I think that was probably open. And the intake valve looks good. I think I'll just clean the valves up and relap them, which means I'll take this intake and this breather off to get the valves out, and I'll decarbon it. And I think that carbon in there is caused from running the 2-cycle mix in it. I think that's what happened. 2-cycle, the oil causes the carbon buildup. And I'll decarbon the cylinder head. You can see there's quite a bit of buildup right in that area right there. So I'll get that cleaned up and this all cleaned up and just give the valves a quick lap. The head gasket, like I say, it didn't look blown. There's no oil blowing from it. So I'm going to say it was a run-on 2-cycle mix, and I think that's what this is from being the gas tank being overflowed because it was all up in here. It's up on the top of the head here. You know, it's kind of all over in there. So I think they just ran 2-cycle mix, and I would explain the heavy carbon buildup and the majorly gummed up carburetor, because usually, being a past marine mechanic, the only time I see carburetors that badly stuck is from 2-cycle oil. So I think this thing's gonna clean up and run like brand new. So I'm gonna dig through my hoard of parts and find a head gasket, and like I say, I'll lap those valves, get the carburetor rebuilt, and then we'll go from there. Well, I threw the blower housing in the parts washer and cleaned that up. It came up really nice. The cylinder head, wherever I cleaned, decarboned. I put the spark plug back in the hole and I glass bead blasted it and just threw this in the parts washer. So that's all decarboned and cleaned. I took the shield off there and cleaned that. I'll decarbon this, clean up that, clean all this up. What I think I'll do is I'll take this thing outside, blow all the heavy dirt off the air hose, and then finish cleaning it up. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things when I watch other tubers, it's kind of, I don't understand why you see somebody put another engine in a car, for example, and they take it out of another car and put it in. They don't even clean it. They don't clean the engine compartment. They just take it out and throw it in and call it done. You know, and then it just takes very little additional effort to clean things up. Even if you're not going to paint it up, just clean it up. Makes the job look better, and it adds value, so you can get more money for it at the end of the day. I just don't understand people that just throw greasy, dirty motors in cars. When they have it out, that's the ideal time to give it a, even if you just scrape it clean with a putty knife or hose it off, get some gunk and just rinse it off. Anything's better than nothing. Clean that up in the parts washer too. And one other thing I want to point out is this is the hose that goes at the fuel tank here. And because it has a sharp bend in here, you can see how it's a little flattened. So to keep this from compressing out, Tecumseh, and I don't know if you can see that in there or not, they put a little spring down in the hose. There you can see it. So that spring is just in this part of the hose, you know, in this part here. It's important to put that in your new hose. So I cut the hose so I can get that spring out of there and reuse it. The rest of the hose doesn't have a spring in it. It's just this part that comes from the tank, and that's just to keep the hose from collapsing where it has that sharp bend at the bottom. So a lot of people, they replace fuel lines and they don't realize that there is a spring in this hose to keep it from collapsing, like a lot of lower radiator hoses on cars have a spring in them too. So make sure you save that spring for your new fuel hose. That's why I cut that fuel hose, so I could take some needle nose pliers. And I just usually guess about where to cut it. And this time my guess was pretty close to the end of the spring. Usually they're somewhere in this area right in here. I was surprised it went that far. So just to give you, you know, a little info there on that. So I'm going to get this outside and blow it off some compressed air. Well, I decarboned it and blew the heavy grease and dirt off with compressed air so it little less to try and clean off. Those Christmas lights I have out in the snow fountain cherry, they're C9s, they're 10 watts a bulb. There's 100 bulbs, so that's 1,000 watts. So we'll plug those lights into this, and that'll pretty much all put a full load on this, and we'll adjust the governor, make sure it's usually under full load. It should be about 110 volts. Running no load, they're usually about 130, 135 volts. So half load, they should be 115, 118 volts around in there. You know, just that's what I've found from past experience with working on generators. If the generator has lost its magnetism from sitting, you can take a corded drill, plug it into the outlet while the engine's running, and turn the drill chuck by hand. That generates a small amount of current and often allows these to remagnetize and start generating power again. Alright, I decided to drain the oil out, let that drain overnight too. Use a special socket to get those spare square plugs out so you don't strip them out. Well, I had the carburetor soaking overnight in lacquer thinner, and it looks pretty good. The throttle shaft, I'm going to take it out and make sure everything's clean around in there. Both the butterflies were bent. This throttle arm is bent because when that's wide open, that will not allow the butterfly to open all the way, and it doesn't line up with the screw, so I'll straighten that out. I didn't have a carburetor kit with the little seal for this little float drain doohickey, so I went to my local mower shop and got a carburetor kit that has that little seal in it, and it's right there. So that was about, I don't know, $8 I think. So that's the carburetor kit, and I had a gasket set. The head gasket, I think, was the reason for the low compression. I might pop the valves out because I found a gasket set, and I think it's the complete set, and it's for this engine pretty much, all because I took the head gasket out and compared them, and they're the same. So I should have the breather and the intake and all. Yeah, there's the breather gasket. So it looks like everything's in there gasket wise for the hole, and there's another breather gasket, and there's 3 breather gaskets in there. So maybe this kit fits multiple engines, but I did have that in my parts stash, so I think I'll pull this little manifold in the breather and just give the valves a lapping in and rebuild the carburetor and put it together and put some fresh oil in it and see if it runs. I did drain the oil out too. The oil is like goo in there. So anyway, I'll get to work on it. This videoing adds a lot of time to the project, that's for sure. On another note, I still have the main jets and carburetor parts soaking in lacquer thinner here, and I reuse my lacquer thinner. You know, I can, you know, what I'll do is I'll just pour this out into this pan, get my parts out of it, and then I'll just let it settle a bit, and then I'll pour it into, I always keep a jug that has used fluid and I right use, so I don't use it to like clean my paint gun or something. But I always save my old lacquer thinner. I don't throw it out because you can reuse it for these type of purposes right here. Lacquer thinner is a great cleaner. It does take paint off things, so you kind of got to try it in an area you can't see, but it'll take stains out of upholstery, and it's just an all-around good cleaner. Alright, I said I was going to take the throttle shaft out of this, and do that. You just take that little spring and you just release it. Out comes the shaft. I want to make sure everything's clean so nothing binds up. That all looks pretty good. I might just wipe that out with some lacquer thinner and shoot all the little jets, and there's a couple little idle jets in there. right in there. There's two little idle jets that need to be made sure they're clear. You can shoot through there. That's a bowl vent. Make sure that's clear. Just kind of make sure all your shoot some gum out through the main nozzle. That should come out that part right there. So just make sure everything's nice and clean on your carburetor, and they should work good. So this carburetor's less these plugs pulled out, pretty disassembled. I'm going to change the seat in there, and I'll show you how to do that when I get to it. I'm going to pull the intake and lap the valves. You got to get the breather off, and I have this little ratcheting screwdriver that I use for harder screws. It's got a little thing here you can change the direction of ratcheting by flicking that thing back and forth, but it just makes it easier to break tight screws loose like on the manifold, and to retighten them so they don't come loose on you when you get the engine going. So we'll get this off and get the breather off. That was finger tight, so that probably would have leaked oil. So I guess it's a good thing taking this apart anyway, and then I can clean it all up. Yeah, I forgot to have the camera rolling, but anyway, we got the exhaust valve out, and it's not burned at all. The seat looks really good, but we'll just clean them up and throw some lapping compound on them. The retainer has the opening in it, so just kind of play around with it for a minute until I get to it, or I suppose I could get a light and shine it on it. Might be the thing to do. Okay, the exhaust valve's done. Now I got the intake valve out, and it doesn't look like there's a thing wrong with the intake valve either, but as long as we got it out, we'll clean it up and lap it in. This is what I use to lap the valve in. You put the compound on there and just stick that on there and just kind of work it around, lift it up, work it around. So we'll get that lapped in and put it back in. All right, I'm going to try and put this back in with the camera there. With that keeper has like a little elongated hole, and it's towards the back, so I got to push that up, and I'm going to turn the lamp off. That'll help with the light. Push that up and pull it back at the same time, and try and get it to drop through the valve, and then I'll push it forward, and hopefully it'll be in. These things can be a little bit of a fuss to get in, and with the camera in the way it might make it worse, so I might have to take the camera off to get this little keeper back on. The proper tool makes it a lot easier, but it just is too big for this little motor. One I have is for the little bigger engines. Alright, I got to move the camera because it's kind of in my elbow way, but you kind of get the picture. Well, with a little bit of fuss, I got those keepers back in. And I just like to look at them and make sure they're back in properly, and they are, and turn the motor over and make sure everything works good. I did put some motor oil on the valve guides. Alright, I got the breather and the manifold back on. I had to clean the parting surface up here. You got to make sure everything's clean. The breather on these, I cleaned it out, and what that is a check valve. So when the piston goes down, it blows crankcase air out. When the piston goes back up, that check valve closes. So the crankcases on these engines typically run on a little bit of a vacuum. So make sure your breather, your check valve, and all that stuff's nice and clean. The breather will come apart. You can cut, there's several gaskets on the breather because you can disassemble it and take it apart and clean it. And I did not take this one apart and clean it. It was really clean, so I just left it alone. So I'm just going to rebuild the carburetor, put the head and the stuff back on, clean it up a little bit, and we'll see if it runs. I did clean the float bowl out, so I'm going to start reassembling this, and first thing I'm going to do is pull that seat out in there. Now, Road King had one of these tools. I was watching him in one of his videos and he was using it to do the seat. It looks pretty slick, so I'm going to try it for the first time and let you know what I think. I usually just put my air hose there and blow it out with compressed air and put a new one in with a drill bit, but we'll see what this does. That is out. So that works pretty good to get that seat out. I'll clean that out with a little carb cleaner and blow it out with compressed air, and I don't want to get carb cleaner on my camera, so I'm going to turn it off and move it. It's all cleaned out, seat's out, so I'm going to put the throttle shaft, choke shaft, plates all back in, and then I'll put that in and reassemble the carburetor. Well, I just dumped all my parts into a pan from the lacquer thinner. So these are the butterflies and the choke arm and the screw for the choke. Alright, the first things first, put the spring back on. That little hook on the spring hooks on the throttle butterfly. That's what returns the engine to idle. Just drop this down in. That end of the spring goes on that ear there, and then your throttle shaft is in. Now I still have to bend that throttle shaft, so I might do that right now, and then I can get the butterfly on and I'll back the screw out. And the reason why I do that is it makes that straighter and easier to put the butterfly back on. But the throttle, as you can see, doesn't open wide open, and we're going to correct that with a little persuasion with needle nose pliers. The throttle plate, I don't know if this is going to show up or not, but there's a little mark, little indicator mark on the plate, and it's important that you put that facing up because these plates are actually beveled slightly so they fit the bore of the carburetor when it's closed at an angle. So make sure you get that in the bore correctly. So you can see it in, and that little pointer is pointed up and it closes pretty good. I put a drop of blue Loctite on the screw because you don't want it to come out, but yet you don't want it to not be able to come out in the future if you want to take it out. Now this, I usually just take a little screwdriver. Hang on, I got a little magnetized screwdriver I'll use. Let me go find it. Well, I couldn't find my magnetized screwdriver, so I'll just magnetize one really quick here. And this just makes life easier to get that screw in the little hole there. So we got it a working throttle now. I'm getting closer, so we'll get the choke in it next. Alright, just shove the choke shaft through the thing, move your spring a little bit, and your choke shaft is in. Then the choke butterfly, you want the flat side down, so just set your, and your choke opens. You can see which way the choke opens, so it's best to put the butterfly in like that, set it in, so when you don't jam the thing. Whoops, I put it in, it's got to go in this way. Like this. Well, I'm getting something, oh, I don't have that down far enough, okay. Just make sure that's pushed down so your screw line's up. And again, a dab of blue Loctite. magnetized screwdriver. Whoops. Guess it's not magnetized that much, but should be enough. Maybe it lost its magnetism while I was horsing around here. Just make sure your butterfly is kind of straight in there so the choke shuts nice and tight. Tighten these screws up good. And we got a working choke. So now we're getting somewhere. We got a working choke, a working throttle. How about that? This is the little seat, and I don't know if this will focus, but one side has like ridges and the other side is smooth. The ridges go into the carburetor, so put the smooth side over your tool like so. Take your tool, stuff that in there, and push that right up into the bottom. Might put some lubricant on it to make it going easier, but I like putting them in dry. I just don't want to take a chance on swelling them up. So that seat is in, as you can see. So that actually works pretty good. I give this a plus. It makes it easier than putting it in with a drill bit, and it actually made it easier to pull it out. Sometimes if they're not badly swollen, it takes a bit to blow them out. You got to use quite a bit of pressure. So that worked pretty good. Happy with that. I noticed this kit comes with all new adjusting screws and stuff, so it doesn't look like I'm going to have to reuse or clean that other one. But anyway, I'm going to dump this out over here on my toolbox so I don't lose any pieces to it. So I'm ready to put the needle and seat and float back in, and again I shook the float. There's no gas in it. Put the little wire back on your needle valve, put it through the little spot there in the float. Put the float in the place there. This kit came with a new pin for the float, so we'll use that. And that's the float should be basically level with the base of the carburetor here, this part of the float. This gap and this gap should be the same all the way around, but this tool, wherever I set it, here it is, came with float gauge too, so I'd say it's right on the money. So the float set, we'll put that new gizmo and the drain thing and the washer thing in the float bowl here and get the float bowl back on. This is the little washer that goes on here. That goes in the float bowl there. And then you put your spring and keeper back on. This is a little bit of a bite. These are like doing those the valve springs. You got to kind of push your spring down so you can get this doodad under there, and you got to push the spring down enough to get that little thing in through there. There we go. So you can drain your float bowl completely with that, so you don't have any residual gas in it. Now, as you can see, there's a flat spot in the float bowl, and that generally goes on the side the fuel inlet's on, like that. So we'll put the new gasket around here, get this on with the other pieces that the kit came with. Brand new one, so I don't need to horse with the old one. Put the gasket on it. the gasket on the carburetor for the float bowl. Set your float bowl on. You want this again on the side that the fuel inlet's on. Put your main high-speed adjusting screw in. I'm going to turn that screw out 1.5 turns. That's all the way in, so half, 1, half. That's a good start. Alright, I put the bolts and the gasket in, and I hooked the governor back up. I put it through the carburetor and then through there. And we'll put those on. Put the nuts back on. I usually start this one first, because sometimes you need to pull the carburetor back a little bit. Well, the carburetor's tightened down. I'll put the air cleaner thing on. Got a new gasket for that, so I'll put the new gasket on it. Well, as you can see, we got the gas tank in place. It's just loose. The head in place. I'm going to cut the fuel line and route that right now, and then we'll start buttoning it up. And I saved the old fuel line, and I'll just hold it together. And I'll cut the new line the exact length. Usually these factory lines are perfect. If you try and make them longer, they kink, or if they make them shorter, they kink. So just make them the original length if your original fuel line's still on the engine. So this fuel line, I just cut this and I jammed the spring down in there. I don't know if that shows up or not, but it kind of runs through the sheet metal here. And it doesn't want to fit through there quite that easily. There it goes. Then it goes through the fins there, and there's that little metal tab that it goes behind, and then it comes out the other end there. So just make sure you shove it the right way through for the spring. The spring's at the gas tank end. And then that will go on there, and I'll put the clamps on first and then the line on the tanks. Alright, the fuel line's all routed, hooked up. The spring is in there so that isn't collapsed. So I'll put the blower housing on and tighten up the head. And alright, last but not least, we're going to put the oil in it. These engines take 20 ounces, so I get my beaker out here. This is an OMC. Had this when I worked in the boat business. It's an OMC beaker, and it's got 50 to 1, 100 to 1 ounces, 24 to 1, 16 to 1 ratios on it. So anyway, full to, let's see, the ounces is right here. That's 16 ounces. So I'll fill it up to there, and then I'll have to put in 4 more ounces to get 20 ounces. Tilt the engine up so the oil just pours in easier. Well, I think it's basically ready to run. It's oiled. It's carbs all rebuilt, new fuel line. I lubricated the recoil. It's got pretty good compression. It's basically, I cleaned it up a bit. basically a pretty nice little unit. I didn't throw it in the parts washer. I didn't want to take a chance in getting anything in the windings of the alternators. Alright, I put a little gas in it, plugged my voltmeter into it, and plugged a fan into it. We're going to see if it starts. I'll just have it in the door here as it is. Raining pretty good out. So let's see what happens. Put the choke on, give it a pull. Putting out any voltage, so we're going to have to take some things apart on the alternator. It does run good. Putting out voltage now. Running my fan on it. That's only running a few hundred watts, so I think we'll leave it with the gas cap is leaking, so I got to do something with that. Alright, we got a major leak on the gas cap. I guess I can see why they had 2-cycle mix in it and why it got oil everywhere. But we'll take the cap apart. It might just be plugged up and pressurizing the tank. I just thought I'd show the gas cap disassembled here, seeing it was leaking. So I just made sure that that was clear. That one was clear. This one, those little holes in there were plugged up, and that was probably the gas was getting up in here and coming out there, and that wasn't allowing any of it to drain back into the fuel tank. And that was somewhat plugged up. There's a bit of corrosion and crud in there, but this goes in here, and then that allows the gas to drain back into the tank, and then the gasket goes in the cap, and this goes in there. So yeah, that's about it. No more leak. took care of the gas cap leak. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe to it. And again, thank you for watching my videos.